city's flames lit up the sky, but our brave boys knew no fear. The Cork Brigade with hand grenades in ambush waiting lay then. The black and tans lay bleeding red from the rifles of the IRA. The tans were taken out and shot by a brave and gallant few.
End of story.
Jim, could you tell me about Desmond Swanton, who was killed in an explosion at the Cork Republican plot in 1963?
Yes. What occurred there was a very unfortunate explosion, accident, where Desmond Swanton lost his life, and his comrade Jerry Madden was seriously injured. It arose out of the erection of a monument to honour the men of the 1st Cork Brigade of the IRA. Contrary to a lot of the old talk that went on following that explosion, let me say in the opening that neither of those men went there to kill De Valera. They were bitterly opposed to De Valera. They were reflecting the views of most Irish Republicans in the city. They were reflecting the views of the Kavanagh family, whose son had been killed outside Cork prison in 1940, machine gunned down by the police under De Valera's regime at the time. It went close to the bone, and there was history there. Back in 1922, it's well remembered that Michael Collins came to town, and one of the places he was brought with Sean McKeown was out to Cork's Republican plot, where McCurtain and McSweeney and many other volunteers were buried. He was met at the gates by upwards to 30 armed volunteers, and the group, Collins's group, approached them, and they were told in no uncertain terms that if they put a foot forward into that grave, the graveside, they'd be shot. To make a point, that account has been recorded by Lil Conlon, who wrote a book on Commemorating back sometime in the 60s. But it was well known in Republican lore down through the years how they stood out against Collins. And just to finish it off, like, Collins retreated with the party that was with him. He backed away from it and went downtown to do other business. Other than that, he was welcomed. And incidentally, the woman who recorded that, Conlon, was a staunch pro-treaty person and supported the treaty within Commemorating at the time. So, like, there you have it, like, that was part of the background. The Republican movement at the time was gone soft. Protests weren't done. There was a feeling that at that time some form of public protest should be made at the fact that De Valera had been selected as the person to unveil the monument. Now, in any event, some people would be saying, Republicans, they weren't sympathetic to Sean Haggerty and the lads who were putting up that monument outside there. Not so. Not so. I have something here that I'd like to bring to the attention of people. It was something like 2 years, more than 2 years before that, that Sean Hegarty formed a committee to erect that monument, which was to cover all the Republicans who were buried there in the first Cork Brigade. For years before that, all over the county and in Cork, there are a lot of monuments to those who died, all around the place. These monuments were unveiled, and Republicans were never out protesting against them. And they wouldn't have been protesting against that either, were it not for the fact of De Valera and his attitude towards Republicans in the 30s and the 40s. That's a fact. That's what incensed them, and what incensed Swanton and Madden was the fact that the Republican movement was doing nothing other than sending a letter to the committee. They felt that there should be more done, as did Republicans in the city at that time. That was evidenced in many ways by the turnout that was there for Swanton when he died, when he was killed. Now, I just want to refer to this statement. There was a commemoration held in November 1960, just a little over 2 years before the monument was erected out there. It was erected by members of the Cork No. 1 Brigade of the IRA, the same people who went on and put up the big monument. And Sean Hegarty spoke at that commemoration, as did another man, Michael Murphy, a prominent IRA man back in the period of the struggle for freedom. And it was of a monument that was erected across the road from Christ the King Church out in the suburban area of Turner's Cross. Incidentally, from where Jerry Madden was born and lived. It was attended by Fianna Éireann, Republican buglers. It was attended by the Cork Volunteer Pipe Band, who Desmond Swanton was a member of and lost his life 2 years later. Sean Hegarty, who was the brigade commandant, and back in those days he was known as the IRA who took a middle side. They didn't join in pro or con or like for the treaty. The neutral IRA they were known as, who had great standing amongst Republicans in Cork. There's a book being written on him, their biography in recent years, and when people read it they'll find out an awful lot more about this man. He spoke that day, and this is what he said. He said that the men whose memory they honour today did not die for anything less than the Republic of Ireland as proclaimed in 1916. He went on to say that Belfast prison, we have today young Irishmen from many different counties serving long terms of imprisonment for the very same ideal. Remember, 1916, the campaign was still on, Operation Harvest. Some people, he said, thought we could secure their release by appealing to the politicians here in the 26 counties. But how could that be when they themselves have men in Mountjoy and will not release them? With him, Michael Murphy said, One of the things we could never understand was why there were so many people today very shy to say that Charlie Daly was murdered at the hands of the British. Charlie was one of the men who was being honoured that day in Turner's Cross. He himself could not find no other name for it but murder. That's the British when they killed Charlie Daly. The time has come, he said, when many must return to their old allegiance. 40 years was a long time to wait, and then have people tell you that they will get back to we will get back our last province by waving a wand. The only wand that we ever knew was the foresight of a rifle, and that was the only wand Britain would understand. He exhorted all those present to teach their children what this plaque stands for, so that they should know the sacrifice those men made and what they themselves made should do to bring about a free united Ireland. And Mr. Arthur Heaps also spoke. He was in the Commemorative Committee. Within a fortnight, these people who spoke those words, and I'm sure they were sincere about them, formed the committee to put up the monument in the Republican plot. The only problem that came up on the scene was the appearance of De Valera. That's why Swanton and Jerry Madden went out there on the night. The Republican movement disowned them. Okay, it was unofficial, and that's the way it goes in the Republican movement. But they went a little bit too far. They wouldn't even. I wasn't the pipe major. We had a different level within the band. I was in the Cork Volunteer Pipe Band. I was actually the OC. That would be like the commissar in the band. But I had no authority. Like it was the staff locally that took the decisions, and they wouldn't support any funerals or anything like that. So I and a number of others, there were quite a number of people, we decided to bury him, and we gave him a full Republican turnout. And there were fellow prisoners of Swanton's. He had been in prison, came down from up the country, and they formed a Guard of Honour, and they led the parade out of the church. In recent times, we were able to supply a photograph of that Guard of Honour leaving the church to see the Lounge Revolution website. It can be seen there. Best thing is just type in Jim Lane and go back through it, and you'll pick it up all right. But that's the way things went from there on in. And a lot of, like I should say, that out of that, a lot of problems came up. Several people were dismissed out of the movement, including myself, for attending the funeral, and 4 members of Commemorating, they were similarly dismissed for attending the funeral. My God, if they were to drag in everybody, there'd have been a pile thing, but they kind of felt that they'd have to kind of turn a blind eye to a lot of them, because most Republicans turned out for Swanton's funeral. They may not have agreed with the tactics, but they could sympathise with what brought it on them, brought it on the movement. But it had the effect of bringing together a lot of Republican people who had been estranged from the movement for years, and some of those who were in the movement but were very dissatisfied with the way they were going. And we had formed a committee known as the Desmond Swanton Commemorative Committee. I was chair in the very beginning, but as soon as Jerry recovered, Jerry Madden, he became chairperson of that committee. And that committee went on to give birth at a future time to what were referred to in one area as the unpublished people, because we published a paper called Phoblacht, and by others as the Irish Revolutionary Forces.
Would you tell us something about Phoblacht and the Irish Revolutionary Forces?
Well, it started out initially with people like myself and Brendan O'Neill and Jerry Higgins and Jerry Madden and a lot of other Republicans. And its earliest beginnings were very much concerned by situations that were developing within the Republican movement. They seemed to be going in a very laissez-faire direction. They didn't seem to know where they were going. But we were, in a sense, trying to sort out Republican traditionalism and what it meant and what was the negative and the positives about it. And I think we came to a fair understanding of that. And in the course of that, it led us more in the left direction. Most of us had been in one way or another on the left-hand side of politics. In fact, one might have said at the time we were probably the only people within the Republican movement in Cork who were deep into the politics of it. And of course I have to say immediately, we were not talking about parliamentary politics. We were talking about revolutionary socialist politics and the way forward and how to go about it. We also still had a position of support for armed struggle, and most of us held with that for many years after that. But what we did in time, by 1965, we became involved more and more in a leftward direction. I was positively gone in that direction. I had been reading a lot of international politics, about the divisions that existed in the international communist movement. I had discussed it with others, with likes of Jerry Higgins, who was a former member of the Cork Socialist Party, great admirer of Mick Reardon and those people, but very disgusted at their attitude towards the national question, as were a lot of other people in the Republican movement. We progressed our politics. I have been referred to occasionally as the most. I suppose that's got to do with the fact that I did read, amongst other international socialists, writings by Moe, to a great extent because there was a big difference between in the international socialist movement, international communist movement, between the policies of the the policies of the Chinese and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had turned over for a good few years, but they copper fastened it in those times with the peaceful road to socialism through parliamentary means, whereas the Chinese under Mao opposed that and insisted on going the traditional communist position of through armed struggle, and they were involved in supporting things. Now, some people might point out to me, but the Soviets were supporting some of the countries like Angola and places like that. Of course, they were involved in those things for many years, and you just don't drop people. But their direction was towards parliamentary politics. But let me say this, the CPGB were involved in supporting the parliamentary road for many years before the Soviet Union. They were past masters of that. They never had any intentions of troubling the Brits, their masters in any way. And there were people in that organisation who were in contact with us and friends of ours, and we could work with them on a broad basis. But we were finding it difficult at times because throughout the period of Operation Harvest they were critical, and they really looked down on the Republicans as people who were dinosaurs, they used to refer to them. They were living in the past. No, sorry, I can talk politics in that area. I wouldn't be using those terms. What I found wrong about the Republican position at that time, as did others in the IRF, was that Republicans hadn't moved forward in the sense that they were into social democracy of some sort. They were looking at the Free State, and they were looking at the politics of the time, and they were offering that if they got in at times, those who wanted to go into Parliament, if they got in, or a lot of them were totally opposed to going in, but if they did, they were going to do better than the crowd that were there. That wasn't enough. We supported Connolly's position. Connolly and his attitude superseded Tone and those people. Tone in their time, Wolfe Tone and those people, were good people, social democratic and what have you. In a particular epoch, it's like in terms of the world and its development, you had slavery, you had feudalism, and you moved on to capitalism. But Republicans were still talking about capitalism, a kind of a more improved type. They still are in many ways. I thought from recent times they were inclined to move towards socialism, but they kind of revert all the time. Parliamentary politics does that for people. But we were pushing that particular line that we should become more involved in the political movements. And we did not see any place there for the CPGB people, or the CP as they would have been known in Ireland. In fact, they didn't become the CPI until around 1970. But the same people were in the Irish Workers' Party and Irish Workers' League and things like that, and CPNI in the north. But at an early stage, in the 63 period, towards the end of 63, they were a bit talkative. They approached some of the people connected with IRF, not understanding who the commitment and their involvement. They were studying Marxism, and they were broadening their attitudes towards their former involvement with the CP people, and could see there was another way. But the likes of the Jim Savages chatted and talked out loud and started boasting how they were going to take over the Republican movement. And we got worried, because by damn we weren't going to leave anybody come in and take over the Republican movement, because we believed that even though the Republican movement wasn't a socialist movement at the time, there was within that movement great people who would struggle. They had shown their commitment to struggle, and that was important. They weren't running away from fight. And there was a lot of them, ordinary working class people. There were people interested in Connolly and matters like that.
And what was your view of the Republican movement at that time, like generally the leadership?
To be honest about it, they were lazy in the sense that they didn't go away and do any theoretical work themselves. A lot of them didn't even bother to bloody well read. And these people from the CP, the people referred to in later times, now when I use the CP, some of them may not have been in the CP, but they were fellow travellers with the CP. the likes of Roy Johnson, Anthony Collin, there were other people as well. There was Mick Tierney in Cork, Paddy, or Tierney some people call him, and there were others in Dublin as well. They all began to flock in, and they were all on about taking over the movement. And a young man was singing like a bird to us. He didn't understand, for a person who was regularly taking on trips to Moscow and every place like that. Mr. Savage didn't really seem to get the grip at all, that he could be telling Jerry Higgins and Liam Flavin all about their plans, but occasionally tell him of new recruits in a boastful way. And I had told Jerry and Liam, keep your mouth shut, listen to it all, pick it up. And it went on like that, and as time went on, we began to get supporters who saw the sense in what we were doing. But the Republican movement, a lot of the people at the top level in Sinn Féin and in the army, they didn't sit down and do any study for themselves. They didn't understand the politics, the international politics, in relation to the communist movement and socialism and all that. And you had to have that grasp. We read a book there at one stage. It was kind of required reading within the group, the polemic of the international movement that existed. It was printed in China at the time. Like I can tell you, other than saying that note, I can tell you, we never at any time had any official relations with the Communist Party of China or anything like that. We got the books on, we ordered them the same as anybody else, but we were interested mainly because of their position in relation to armed struggle and a couple of other matters. They weren't the greatest, like, you know. If the CP at the time had a good national position, they would have got a lot of support from working class people of a Republican background down in Cork. But they couldn't have it both ways. We were not going to cede the Republican movement to those people. And we came out with a paper on Phoblacht, and we displayed that situation for a good lengthy period of time, for over 2 years, 3 years, 65, 66, 67, 3 years. We hit them hard, and no apologies for doing it, because their attitude was despicable. All they were doing was like parasites leaning on the Republican movement, and there were people in the Republican movement at that time foolish enough to go along with them, but there was an awful lot of them too bloody lazy to come along and develop some politics themselves. Incidentally, just to tell you, the Phoblacht documents, they have begun to be shown in the archives of the Cedar Lounge Revolution website in recent times. The first 2 issues went out recently, and they'll be followed for the rest of the year. And after that, we'll be publishing the People's Voice, which was our attempt to come away from the secrecy of circulating within mainly the Republican movement on Phoblacht, talking to the people, particularly at local level, or politics, unashamedly, where Marxist, Leninists, call it what you will, at that particular time.
Is this what led you into the Cork Vietnamese Freedom Association in the 1960s? Is that how you led into that?
Yeah, well, that went hand in hand as part of our work. It wasn't new to me, the business of the Vietnamese struggle. I remember as a garçon, as they'd say, listening with great glee to the surrender of Dien Bien Phu to the Vietnamese. they were being occupied at the time by the French, and of course all they were worried about in this country was the possibility of some nuns out there being raped or something else. Of course, everybody away out there, yellow faces, all these kind of people, they were all down as bad people. Like, they'd have to conduct warfare that way, you know.
And would you have heard of Ho Chi Minh at that time?
Yes, I would have. And there was another man, Dieng, or he was a great military leader out there at that time.
Jap or something, sorry?
Yap, yeah, something like that, yeah. When you get a bit older, you get a bit poor on remembering names, you know. Yap, or I'm not sure, yeah, some name like that. I do, I remember that. I could empathise with that. And we fought for it. And we organised a committee in Cork. And I'm proud of the fact that at that time, it was a broad committee. Even the people like Savage and his friends who we opposed were invited into it. The official, or it was pre-divisions now in the Republican movement. We're talking 66, around that period.
United movement.
Yeah, it was a united group, and we had people from the University College in Cork, and I mean, there's a photograph there again in the website's Cedar Lounge under a document I wrote, miscellaneous notes. Again, if you go to Jim Lane, type that in and you'll get them all. You know, there's a lovely photograph in that of all the group down picketing a boat, and I was told afterwards that the CP, probably people done it, circulated it throughout Europe with their papers or things like that, and it's supposed to have ended up out in Vietnam and places like that. I suppose like it was nice to show people in Ireland out protesting at that. Yeah, we were, and we had an incident up in Tipperary, Nina. We went up there, and there were 3 of us, Jerry Higgins, 4 of us I think, Jerry Higgins, Derry McCarthy, and Jerry Madden, the man who was injured at the plot. We went up there. The American ambassador was speaking. Of course, we were criticised by some people because Father McDoyer was speaking, and we greatly admired McDoyer for his work in Donegal. Like, there's no question about that. But that wasn't any reason why we shouldn't go there. We went up and we protested at the American ambassador. But we were beaten up, to be honest about it, by overwhelming numbers. What I found sad about it was Jerry Madden, with 1 leg and 1 eye, was beaten to the ground by big heavies who were murderers there, and the Sunday press at the time had a bit of an old skit at it about the 4 people with their little banners and things like that. But there's nothing unusual about protests with 4 people. It was way up the country. We went all the ways up to Nina for it, like, you know. So there you are. We were much into that all right at the time, yeah.
Could you tell me something about Sarah Era Cork, and could you tell me something about Sarah Era's paper, The People's Voice, and what was your view on Sarah Era Dublin or Sarah Era Action Group?
Yeah, well, Sarah Era, the choice of the name, arose out of when we were producing on Phoblacht, the admiration that we held for an organisation that was formed in the early 30s in Dublin, known as Sarah Era, Free Ireland, as you understand. It was radically left, didn't last for very long. The 30s are an interesting period of study, really, with respects to the strength of the left-wing people at that time. we decided we had done enough work on Phoblacht, circulating it amongst Republicans around the country, and we should go more out to the people. We intended to come out with a proper paper, but the police had looked after that because they'd been around every printer in the town trying to source out where the Phoblacht was being printed. And we got nowhere with anybody in town to publish as a monthly or anything of the People's Voice. So we had to go out. We bought a duplicator, which was like the A4s nowadays. It was double that size, all in one piece. And we got put in colour and everything. Fierce job to print, because you had to change all the colours and what have you. We tried to do the best with it. We went to 6 issues. And we were then inclined to drop off, like, you know. But in the 6 issues, we explained what we stood for, and there are statements in it from Sarah. We would claim, except for at a later stage, with the other people who initially called themselves the Sarah Action Group in September 1969. We had our position in writing, and of course the Phoblacht was to the back of it, like, you know. We had a political situation there. The paper sold okay, you know. It was well received. We didn't lose any money on it. We got rid of all the copies of it regularly and what have you. Now, in early 66, having been with the Phoblacht for over a year at the time, we did come in contact with people from Dublin and other areas who came to us to have a talk about the way forward and what have you. And we did meet some people from Dublin, but all we had was discussion. Kind of one way, we were nearly involved in some activity they wanted to pull off. That didn't work out anyway, but it was just a small matter. But in 69, when things were getting hotter, they looked for a meeting with us, and they came down to Cork. We met them, had a discussion with them. We're very established in our position. We understood Guevarism, which was a trend that was popular at the time. Many good people were supportive of the position. But obviously they in Sarah were very taken with Guevarism as well. And to a great extent it had to do with, unlike our position of primarily building a party and building a base of support, they felt that if you went out in the countryside and the cities and all of it and pulled off spectaculars, that it would bring people towards you. They propositioned us that they would pull the spectaculars and we should do the political work, statements and matters like that. And we turned it down. Because they might have said we were orthodox in our approach. But I have no regrets about that, like. I suppose we were. We wanted to start building a political movement from the bottom up, not starting in that manner. We didn't agree, and we parted as friends, and they went back to Dublin, and we didn't hear from them for quite a while. Now, just to continue with that part of it, I had been involved in helping the Republican movement in 69. We initially, as Sarah, had sent 2 of our people up to Derry for that week, that all the problems occurred in Belfast and Derry and places like that, to keep a watching brief on what was going on above there. Now, we were interested in what was going on in the north. As a matter of fact, we had Eamon McCann down to our premises in Cork one evening, and he gave a lecture on the civil rights movement and what was going on about there and his attitude on it and all the rest of it. Despite the fact that at the back of it, like, I knew that Eamon was connected with the Irish militant and lawless and people like that, you know. Okay, we weren't kind of narrow at all. We, like, you have to be broad. He was making great contributions to the struggle above there in that area, so we had him down. We went up anyway, and we kept an eye. Trouble happened. I got people together here in Cork, and we were to go up there. We decided to go up. Incidentally, two people approached us for a lift up there, who became known afterwards to the Sarah people, the Sarah Action Group people. The two, this is where the names go at times.
Is it Whites?
The Whites. Donnan and Larry. And they wanted to go up. And again, like I said, I hadn't any objection to their going up. I said, yes, I'd bring them. But I said, I have one condition. And because I knew they were a bit on their own, like they wanted to do things their way, I said, I'll bring you up if you can give me a word that when you get up there, you fall in with the people above there, whoever running the place in charge. Because that's the way it should be. What do you know about Derry and all the rest of it? And they wouldn't accept that. And I said to the two of them, goodbye. I had two other fellas ready to step into their place. Two fellas who had been over in England, IRA men, but who had been dismissed peremptorily because they were involved in an official action, trying to get arms.
Was that Smullen and Lynch?
No. There were two lads anyway.
Oh, they haven't been caught.
Who were from Cork and escaped on the operation that Lynch and O'Sullivan were involved in Dagenham, where I happened to work for a period of time. I actually went over and gave evidence for Conor Lynch and Sullivan that I sent them over there to do some teaching and study with young Republicans in the London and Dagenham areas. You see, O'Sullivan, I think, was born in Dagenham. An awful lot of Irish, Cork people in particular, worked in Dagenham and Fords. And I just said to them, if you go over there, I said, you can spend the summer. Lynch was in holidays from the university. And
was he Jack Lynch's son?
He was Jack Lynch's son, and a nephew, by the way, a cousin of Brendan O'Neill's. Like, if I could put it to you like this, in fairness to them, the O'Neills, or the Lynches rather more than that, they were a famous Republican family where Cork was concerned, way back out to the times of Admiral Somerville and all those people out in West Cork. There's long stories there, like, but yeah, I went over and I tried my best anyway. Yeah, I came home anyway quick. But there were two lads anyway escaped, and I brought them up there. And I understand at some stage they became involved with Sarah. There would be two people from Cork who I understand would have been involved with Sarah at a later stage. They weren't a break from us. They were dismissed by the IRA. Right? That's that part of it. But in September 1969, I was on my way to a meeting in Lurgan, County Armagh, organised by J.B. O'Hagan where they gathered people from Belfast and all over the north who were involved in the committees of defence, and most of them IRA, and included people as well like Rory Brady and Dave O'Connell, who they appointed, they gave him some position anyway for organising defence or something like that, you know. But before I went up to that meeting, by sheer chance, I think it was over near where the Griffith Monument is in Dublin. The park there, you know, where, sorry, not the Griffith Monument, Sean Russell.
Yeah.
I think.
Fairview, yeah.
Yeah, Fairview. We bumped into a few people who were in the grouping of people that had approached us for fusion to get together, and we had a chat. Right? That was after the problems that went on in Derry, and I had brought these two lads up, and I hadn't seen them for a while, and I got kind of noticed that they might be involved with the people who were up in Derry that we spoke to, and I happened to meet them, and I said, I'd like to see these other lads if they're still with you. I heard they were, and they said, oh yeah, we'll have them here for you tomorrow morning. And then we made an appointment. I went on up to this meeting. We were invited there as Sarah, and Jerry Higgins was there, and I was there. I think that's all we had. I'd say we were probably invited at the instigation of Frank Morris
From Donegal.
Mm-hmm. Who was a great help to us back in the 50s as a member of Sarah, and likewise was very helpful in 1969 when I was up there helping the IRA. I'll go back to that now too for you. But I just kind of went on to the Sarah era people. We were at that meeting. It was an interesting meeting. That's where the meeting that Jim Sull was there, staunch supporter of Cathal Goulding. But there's a book there about the IRA or something that Goulding mentions that on that day he was running around the north trying to contact people, but obviously he didn't know where. Jim Sull was over at the meeting, which was, well, I wouldn't say it was a Provo meeting, but there was quite a potential Provos there and things like that. He was over there, but the three of them went down. There was three of them there. A fellow Kennedy, who had been involved earlier on in Cork with an attempt to bring in arms around 58 from America. It was caught actually. Paddy Devlin, SDLP person at some stage.
He'd been in the IRA in the 50s. He was in
Oh yeah, sympathetic. Yeah. And as I said, Jim Sull. And the three of them, they didn't say it out straight, but when the meeting left, when they got up and left the meeting, they said they had to leave early. There was whispers all around the place. We were all told. They said they had to go down to Dublin. There had been a discussion with respect to Jim Craig, the minister in the north, the unionist, about his importance up there in looking after the loyalists and supporting them one way or another, you know. And they made the point, leaving the meeting, that they were going down to Dublin and they were going to meet a man in Dublin in the cabinet who was every bit as important within the structure down in Dublin as was Craig above in the north. And they left the meeting. They didn't name anyone, but I think if you put two and two together with all the meetings that took place that time, what people were saying when they left the meeting, it turned out to be right. They went down to see Charlie High. Like, I heard all this talk about people siding up and all the rest of it. Look, there were people connected, like Jim Sull and all the rest of it, down meeting Haughey and all these people who ended up, we say, with the sticks, as they called themselves later, or they were called by the provost because of the sticky lilies. Look, on both sides, there was a mix of involvements with one crowd or another. I don't ever believe, like this thing about the IRA being, the Provo IRA being set up by Fianna Fáil.
Jim, what was your view then of the split between the provisionals and the officials when it happened?
Well, as I was kind of developing it there to an extent, like, I didn't see any great differences. There were some of them, like in the sticks, or the officials, as they call themselves, making out to be on the left. Probably had a good few people on the left, but most of them were Republicans out to have a go. And that's the way it turned out afterwards. Goulding probably wasn't looking for that way forward. And he had his plans made with the likes of the Johnsons and the Collins and all those people. But it didn't go that way, like. When the bugles blew and the flag went up, they were all off together. And they were having their bash. They had these things about if called upon, like, and if they're attacked, that they'll retaliate and all that kind of stuff went on. But they were deep into it, which was creating problems within it. McGilla started getting upset about killings over in Derry and all these kind of things. And then they went away and pulled off like jobs like that. The canteen in England.
Or the shop bombing, yeah.
Yeah, where they were responsible for killing a lot of people. Now, a great friend of mine, Anthony Dornan, who was later in the INLA, but in those days he was in the sticks, he told me of a meeting he had been at following the news coming in about the Aldershot thing. And he said when it was coming in, they were all in great form above there. I won't be naming all the top names there at the time, I leave it like, but they were ecstatic about the outcome of it, you know. They were all that way. I often found when you'd be involved in trying to politicise people, when it came to events that sparked off the republicanism and the need to strike back and all the rest of it, the theories and the what have you in relation to the working class and what should be done and all the rest of it went to the wall. They were back as Republicans, like.
And yet the provisionals who were accused of being right-wing had a lot of left-wing people.
Well, look, I knew people who went Provo and they were Republican. And they were left-wing as well. One of the old friends I had back in the days, pre any of these differences, was Mick Fitzgibbon. He ended up with the RSF eventually before he died. He died a few years back there. He was very elderly when he died. He was always a good friend. Mick used to circulate in the times that I was finding it hard to deal with the pressures that I was getting from the right-wing people. Mick was circulating underhand, like the Connolly paper, the Irish Democrat. He'd be looking around and he'd slip it to you and all the rest of it. Mick was supporting left-wing politics all that time, like, you know. And Mick went with the provost at the time. There were several others. I knew people then who went with the sticks or the officials because they didn't like some of the people who were emerging. I'm talking about Cork now, as leaders in the Republican movement, the Provo Republic in Cork. For instance, Liam Mulcahy, who would have favoured former prisoner as a result of one of the raids in the north, spent his time up there. That would be the early Omagh raid. Liam Mulcahy ended up with the officials, and he told me at some later stage that he would have went with the Provos only when he said Stevenson appointed Gerald McCarthy as the OC in Cork. Oh fuck it, he wasn't going to win at all. He couldn't. Let me say this about Gerald. We had trouble with him during the period. If people read the miscellaneous notes now, they'll get a pile of it. Gives you more time, when you sit down and write, But I've most of it recorded there. He was very right-wing, Gerald was. Very traditional, but right-wing. He turned afterwards against, within the Republican movement before the split, he turned against the party because of the fact that Johnson wrote something in the paper at the time critical of the movement for all the time, saying rosaries and things like that at commemorations. We didn't make any statement on that. We didn't want to go into everything. But I and several others in conversations supported what Johnson was saying. There was more than Catholics dying in our struggle for freedom. But every time, I remember down in Middleton one time, it was into a Protestant graveyard they were going, because sometimes Catholic and Protestant were buried in the same graveyard, and some of the lads, the band went in, they were in their ages, and when they came out, I said to a lad, I said, geez, you were very long inside there. Oh yeah, we had a lot to do with the last post and all the rest of it. And I said to him, I said, that's a Protestant graveyard. Was there anything, any problem about that with you? I was just kind of teasing him at the time, and he turned around to me and he says, I'm telling you, boy, he says, they need the prayers as much as our crowd. That was the simplistic kind of attitude towards it, It was queer. But I thought Johnson at the time was right, but Gerald went on afterwards speaking on platforms, attacking the Republican movement for their attitude on communism and all that, which he came out against me and others following the Swanton affair as well, He was just possessed with that kind of a thing. If he was here today listening to me, he'd be smiling. He wouldn't be saying that. He'd be saying, he'd know I was telling the truth, that was his forum, and he had no apologies about it, but he was heavy, But Liam Mulcahy didn't go in to the movement because of Gerald becoming part. So they went in and out for different reasons. And people go back in time and they talk about people following De Valera and people following Collins and all the rest of it. Of course there was an awful lot of that now, but it was the same back in those days. There were people followed Goulding, and there were people followed maybe Mark Stefan. They might have followed him, and in the different areas, their leaders and things like that,
Same as split with Costello or Rory O'Reilly, people do tend to follow, don't they?
Yeah, they do, but the Seamus Costello thing, was a clear example, then again, of how lacking in unity they had within the official movement at the time, that it eventually came to a big split again away from from then, like, you
Within
know.
about 3
But
years.
yeah, it did come up. But you know, an interesting thing also is this. I would just want to dwell a few minutes on the influence of the CP people at that time. When the troubles really escalated after 69, many of those people disappeared from the scene. Greaves was more or less gone. Greaves, in an editorial at that time in the Irish Democrat, made some comment about what political scientist has bundled his involvement like with the Republican movement. Because obviously he was referring to Johnson. That's my opinion, like, you know. He was. And Tony Collin then kind of drifted away too. And several of the others, like, they drifted away as well. Their big ploy to take over the movement had gone astray. Now, it's an interesting thing. When I was on my way, I came back from the north in '69, having been up there with a small grouping of Sarah era people, and we came back to Cork. I was told Eddie Williams was looking for me. Eddie Williams was the OC for Cork and South Kerry, of the IRA Cork City in South Kerry. And he asked me, would I go up to the north, that he had sent up already the Cork unit, but they were given the area of Derry, Tyrone area, like east, or the west, like of that area of Tyrone and down around there. And he was aware that I had good contacts up there, and there's some people all right in Derry, Johnny White and a few of these people, and I had already watched them when the few days I was up there beforehand, and they were in bog. Oh, they were in trouble. They were being attacked, well, not physically but verbally, by the ordinary people. Where are your guns? What defence are you giving us? They were being, it was hell. Despite all our differences, I felt it was time for me to be bigger than them, and I accepted I would go up with them. And I did go up with Eddie Williams, and I attended a meeting. It wasn't a meeting, it was just a getting together of two people. Eddie had to go over to an Army Council meeting, which was called, this was the Sunday now after the big trouble that weekend, you know. It was the Sunday. I was back up, on the way up back to Derry, and I attended a meeting, or a meeting of two people rather. And Eddie Williams went over to a meeting of, an impromptu kind of meeting of the Army Council. And present at that meeting was Tony Collin. Now, I don't know whether Colin would have been aware of this, but towards the end of the meeting, or sometime during the meeting, Eddie Williams took Cathal Goulding aside and remonstrated with him the fact that Colin was at the meeting, that he wasn't a member of the IRA. Now, people have often argued about whether he was or not, like, but I'm just telling you the truth as I know it. Eddie Williams said he wasn't, and Goulding didn't deny that. He wasn't a member of the IRA. But he was brought in by them to give advice. Now, we leave the advice for the moment now, and we'll go on to Derry. And I went up to Derry, and I got the billets for the Cork people up there, and had them, and I got the greatest support, as I always did, from my friend over in Donegal, Frank Morris, and he got billets for him, and all his contacts, they gave a handout. They were always there to give a handout. But we weren't there long. Maybe it was on the Monday when Tom Mitchell came up from Dublin and gave the message to Eddie Williams that the plans that had been made by the army, again I'm talking about the IRA, were cancelled. That was to take aggressive action against the British Army. They had gear up there and all the rest of it, but it was called off. Now, I had seen what the unit who came up from Cork had. I started thinking back to 56, and all I had heard from fellas like Jack McCabe, who had been keeping me informed and keeping the IRF informed in those times about the rundown of arms and what have you, and training and everything, all was coming true, you know, it was coming true. But I'll go back to the meeting that Sunday night over in the Gardner Place. Liam O'Comon was there. He was the organiser for the west of the north, and he was giving, I didn't in the past disclose the name, like, but he was giving a report to Tom Gill, to Marsh McGilla. And the report went like this when he was asked for the different areas, North Derry and South Derry and all that area that he'd have been responsible for, about the armaments. It was like this: well, we have 2 rifles there and we have a few shorts, and what about South Derry? They're not the actual figures, but I'm trying to give it the feel of it. They were only talking about 2 or 3 weapons here and a few there, and some of them mightn't be up to scratch and all the rest of it. Oh, Jesus, I said to myself, 'tis worse than 56 in where shortages are concerned. So, having seen what was above there, and when the thing was called off for to take any action against British forces, I thought that change of the situation was right. From my experience and from what I saw there, I think it was right. They'd have been massacred. They hadn't the gear, and it would have been wrong. Now, I understand that one of the things, I would agree with him, Tony Collin gave to that meeting in Dublin, was not to go on the offensive, don't start that, things were going to be terrible, to be the last thing should happen against it. I think it upset Eddie Williams, all right, but do you know something? For different reasons, I could agree with Colin. Colin was on how it would upset the forward movement of the civil rights movement in the north and things like that. Maybe he had a thing. I was looking at it from a different point of view, my experiences of armaments and what would be needed and all the rest of it. Yeah, the decision was right. He didn't give him any bad advice. And I'm saying that now, a person who was involved, as I would have seen it, through the organisations that they had at the time, the Wolf Tone societies and all those of trying to take over the movement, you know. I wouldn't say you disagree with everybody at any time. You need to take a broader outlook on things. I wouldn't disagree at all with what he said, like, you know. We agreed for different reasons. I said we never met one another to talk about it, but I'm saying that now, like, I would have agreed that it was the right decision not to go in the offensive at that particular time, you know.
Well, thank you very much, Jim Lane, which is part 1 of 2 interviews. We'll come back and do the from 1970 onwards
As
next time.
Padre O'Donnell said one time when he came out with a book back in those times, more or less, there will be another day.
That's right.
Indeed.
Cork City's flames lit up the sky, but our brave boys knew no fear.